Welcome back to West Texas View.
We're so happy to have Carol here, and we've just been laughing and giggling about all these funny stories. And Carol, I want you to continue your stories about the individual WASP, because some were sad stories.
They really were. About 4 years ago, a WASP came back. She was brought back by her daughter and son-in-law from Florida. They were doing a car trip to see relatives, but the museum was their destination. And she had married a young pilot who was in training in one of the bases around Abilene. She was at Avenger Field. He graduated. They were married in the little Episcopal church, which still stands. That church is still in Sweetwater. They were married there. She stayed in Sweetwater, continued her training in the WASP program. He graduated, was deployed overseas, and was killed on his first mission. So here is a precious couple giving of themselves for the war effort, both of them, but anticipating a future that never came to fruition. I mean, she was a widow before she was ever a wife.
A bride.
They never were able to, set up housekeeping. They never had a home. Stories like that. But she was able to come back and remarry, have a family that was very devoted to her. But still a sad story.
But appreciate. And another story I remember was the Philadelphia debutante, whose parents were extremely wealthy. They had their own private plane, and she had learned to fly because of that. And she had a 2-year-old daughter when she became a WASP. And of course the nannies and the family took care of the daughter while she was in training and then went to the war. Her husband was also a military pilot, and both of them were killed. And so they left the little 2-year-old.
The children, yes. We have a lot of visitors, not a lot, we've had 2 or 3 visitors to the museum who have been nieces and nephews of WASP. And they say, I was just a little boy or girl, but I remember that Aunt Betty left her 2 children with my mother and father while she
went to the war effort.
Exactly. And they left comfortable homes, they left careers, they left college, they left families to take care of what they thought was their destiny, having to save the country.
Remember the other woman that lived in Florida, and she ferried fishermen. And I can't remember exactly her story, but she left that job and came to the war effort. And then there was another one who was her family was in the orange tree growing business, and she left that kind of against their will because
exactly. And when the program disbanded in 1944, a number of these WASP went to work for the government. Well, it was still civil service, but delivering the U.S. mail in the Northwest Territory, the northwestern part of Canada, and of course Alaska was a territory of ours. And the only way you could get to Alaska then was by plane or by boat. And in fact, a WASP died this last week who, after the war, moved to Alaska and had a career there and was quite a naturalist and very active in the conservation of Alaska. And I mean, it was open territory where planes were the norm for transportation as opposed.
And speaking of that, as you walk in the big room, the hangar of the museum, one of the things that's so impressive is all around the perimeter is the flags representing every state that there was a WASP from. Which includes Canada.
Right. There were there were only 48 states, but there were WASP from every single state, Canada and Mexico and Alaska. And Hawaii. In fact, one of the WASP was flying, had a student up in a plane when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and she saw the Japanese planes flying in, recognized them for what they were, landed immediately. She was not fired upon, and but WASP came from each state was represented by WASP.
And it's so impressive as you go in and look at that.
Each WASP class, like they were there 6 months, so each class had its own yearbook. And the pictures that we have around Hangar 1 are the pictures from their yearbooks. We do not have all 1,074 pictures. I wish we did, but we don't. But when you talk about what the WASP did after the program closed, a lot of WASP just went back home, became mothers or wives.
Teachers, librarians.
And contact was lost, never to be. So I mean, there are WASP that we really don't know where they are.
But one of the things that the Hap Arnold, who was the commander, was so appreciative of what they did, and one of his last graduation speeches that he gave to the women who were graduating from a class said, "We will never forget you."
Exactly.
And then just a few months later, the war was over, and Congress voted to seal the records, and they were lost until 1977 when President Jimmy Carter said, "This is a travesty."
Right.
After he got the story from a few of these women.
Well, and Barry Goldwater was very instrumental too. Barry Goldwater, the crew that flew his plane from Arizona to Washington were a crew of 3 women who had been WASP. They had become pilots by that. I mean, private pilots or commercial pilots by that time. So Barry Goldwater was very familiar with the WASP program, and he helped these women when they rose up as they were bringing women into the Air Force and the Army. In fact, that was what instigated it. In '75, they announced that women were going to be able to go to military academies, and women were going to be able to start flying. And it was a big hoopla, the first women to fly military aircraft. Well, my goodness, these women rose up in arms and said, "You are sadly mistaken. We flew military aircraft in the 40s, and with the help of Barry Goldwater and some other very influential Washingtonians, they
and that's when they began planning this, and in 2000 they began doing this gold medal.
Was when they got the gold medal. The Congressional Gold Medal is the highest honor that can be bestowed on a citizen that is not in the military.
We're going to have to take a break. See you in just a minute.
Thanks for joining us for News West 9's West Texas View with Johnny Lou Avery. This has been a public affairs presentation of KWAB-TV and KWES-TV.